Committee meeting of Mount Pleasant Town Council for this Monday, May 4th, via video conference under emergency measures. Item number 1 on the published agenda is the call to order. So Lori, if you will, item number 2, excuse me, is the roll call. Lori, if you'll do the roll call, I'd appreciate it.
Mayor Haney,
Here.
Jay Grambo,
Here.
GM Whitley,
Here.
Laura Hyatt.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All are present, so we may proceed with the quorum. Item number 3 is approval of the minutes from the March 3rd, 2020 meeting. I know that seems like about 2.5 years ago now.
So moved.
To all of us. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approval of the minutes as published, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes are passed. Public comments that were received. This is item number 4 on our agenda, that were received by 3 p.m. on Sunday, either by email or live voice message. 3 p.m. Sunday with the clerk will be included. Others will not be in the minutes, but they will be read. They will be received by the council members who are members of this committee. So those will be, those that were received by the deadline will be going into the record. Item number 7 is legal matters. 7A is to discuss the emergency ordinance of council passed and any possible changes. I know that everyone received a copy of the ordinances number 20025, 20026, and 20027. 20025 is the one that addressed normal operating procedures of town council, gave ourselves express permission to participate remotely, so long as we adhered to the provisions of South Carolina Freedom of Information Act. Item number 2 of that was to instruct the town administrator to authorize and develop a plan to ensure continuity of delivery of government services in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Item number 3, and I'm in ordinance 25, had to do with revoking any special event permits. Item 4 announced that this expired 61 days after enactment of the ordinance, which I believe is state law. And that item number 5 is that all deadlines imposed by town ordinance applicable to the municipality or the applicant shall be suspended until the expiration of this ordinance. And item 6 had to do with eliminating price gouging. So I wanted this committee to take a look at this emergency ordinance, as we will also take a look in the next item at the emergency proclamation, and see what we need to do. I know the time on this legal is Mr. Pagliarini here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I believe 61 days from March 17th, if Siri on my iPhone did the math right, that this would expire on Monday, 17 May. Is that correct?
Correct, Mayor. That's what I have as well.
Okay. So either way you look at it, this expires on the 17th of May. So I wanted to see, and I'll go to legal first, what the pros and cons of council undoing that would be. If we were to undo that, would we also be undoing our ability to meet remotely, which we obviously need to keep? I think we also want to keep things in there about the deadlines. We don't want to penalize anybody for the fact that town hall is not open and boards and commissions are not meeting. So if you would just give us an overview and maybe your impression of where we stand in relation to this, and I guess the other ordinances. I wanted to mention numbers 26 and 27 had to do with plastic packaging and products, and 27 had to do with temporary signs. That was so restaurants could advertise that they were indeed open for carry out. Mr. Pagliarini?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and members of the committee. Exactly right. The first emergency ordinance 025 does expire on May 17th. the two following ordinances, which were effective on March 7th, 10 days later on May 27th. Um, Certainly, legal believes it is crucial to have authorization to perform meetings in this fashion and capacity. One thing we've learned is that things change on a daily basis, and by allowing that to expire, under the hope or idea that we'll be able to get together and meet can change in a very short period of time. So, and you are correct, Mayor, those 61-day requirements, that's a state law requirement, meaning it can go no longer than those timeframes. So 025, we believe, is very important to extend. 26 and 27, again, respectively relate to the plastic packaging ordinance and then the temporary sign ordinance. So less crucial from a procedural standpoint, but also for consideration. And finally, Mayor and committee members, I would add that 025, I know there was discussion at the last week's council meeting about boards and the like. It should be fairly simple if council wish to codify that discussion and allow boards and other appointed groups the operating procedure leeway that council has as well. So we could easily include that in an extension.
Okay, let me ask a clarifying question. The 61-day state mandated expiration does not mean we can't extend it. It just means that it automatically expired 61 days from the day that it was passed, it was signed on the 17th. I guess that's the legal date of that. We might have passed it on the 16th. I can't remember.
Right, Mayor. That is 61-day maximum. There would have to be another vote. And as we know from prior votes on these types of ordinances, it is a 2/3 majority. So there is a heightened standard for approval. But yes, sir, there would need to be another council vote to extend.
There's flies
Okay.
all around me.
So we are able to by 2/3 majority to extend the same ordinance, or do we have to pass a new ordinance with a new number and a new start date?
Right, Mayor. I thought about that. I would just go with the new number. I don't know that it affects council from an operations standpoint, but I just think for tracking and historical purposes, I would assign a new number to it.
Okay. Committee members, where I'm going with this is I was thinking maybe what we would do is replace that emergency ordinance with a new emergency ordinance that maybe the thing we passed that allows the boards and commissions to meet without necessarily demanding that they meet, as we've gotten some feedback from at least one board chair, that there may be a hesitancy on their part to meet, but it would allow them to, especially depending on the fact that they have to constitute a quorum. Would the committee members be amenable to possibly having legal draft a new emergency ordinance of council that takes in what's already in the existing one, which is 025, take into that what council talked about of the boards and commissions meeting, and we would just come up with a new ordinance which could, not necessarily will, have its own 61-day limit. Any comments? If you're raising your hand, I can't see you. Everybody has disappeared from my screen.
I'll jump in.
Yes, Jake.
Okay. I don't know. I think another 61 days, I know it can always be reversed, but I don't think that's the right message to send. I mean, based on the governor's comments and how things are going, I fully expect for things to be pretty much open in June. I mean, I personally would not want to go 61 days. And based on conversations that I've had with other council members as well, I think, and I want to hear what everyone else on this committee says too, but I think there is a desire for us in June, at least, to maybe have committee meetings in person. Maybe it incorporates social distancing and that sort of thing. But I mean, if restaurants are open for outdoor seating now, indoor seating is coming soon enough. I don't see a reason why in-person public meetings can't start happening by June.
With that in mind, would we maybe, of course, we would have to do this at a full council meeting. Of course, this committee only makes recommendations, but we would come back, have a full council meeting with a draft ordinance. Mr. Pagliarini, could we just pick a date, like, and I'm just thinking out loud, end of May, right?
Yeah.
And then, end of May. Granted, well, we don't have meetings, regular meetings before then anyway. But do that through the end of May.
And as long as it is under the 61 days, Mayor, the committee can recommend and council can approve any such time or date.
Right. And then Jake, also, if there's any need on any of these, and I know I'm skipping between ordinance number 025 and 26 and 27, but if there's any need, like on the plastic packaging, that one has to expire 61 days after it was passed. We may need to extend that one. That's one reason I called this meeting, put these things on there. They're all different things.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Yeah, we may be able to have committee meetings and council meetings with social distancing before we are ready to go back to our plastics ordinance, which is a standing ordinance of the town. So I'm just trying to keep the issues separate here and how we may have to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mayor, it's Jean Whitley.
Yes.
So my concern is with the price gouging component of that ordinance. I think that needs to stay in place at least for another 61 days, because we do still have shortages of various things, and who knows what those shortages are going to continue in the next 61 days. And I think that we should at least have that one going forward. And maybe the language of the in-person or virtual meetings just gives us the option to hold them virtually. As Mr. Pagliarini said, things change on a daily basis. And if things loosen up here and within a few days we have a second spike, or there's a severe increase in the number of cases, we may wish to maintain that optionality of having the ability to meet virtually.
Yeah, the other advantage of meeting virtually is that no matter what, whether it's opening things up or, God forbid, we have a second spike and had to take some steps back, by meeting virtually, wherever you are, whenever you can do it, we can do it and we can get it done. That's the option of still having that in there, right? It gives us that flexibility to meet and get it done. I mean, we just had, if y'all have not heard, the Economic Development Committee call for a special council meeting that looks like we're going to have tomorrow afternoon at 3 or 4 o'clock. Fortunately, because of video conferencing, we can all do it this way. Otherwise, we would have to get a whole room ready and everybody would have to come here. Does that make sense?
Mayor, so Mayor, I would like to move that we recommend to full council that we do as you stated and issue a new ordinance, a new draft of an ordinance that preserves that optionality as we discussed,
Okay.
but especially keep those important provisions regarding price gouging in place.
Okay.
GM.
We have a motion. Is there a second, or?
I was just going to ask, just for sake of ease, can we just say, instead of 61 days, can we just say end of June or the last day of June? It just seems easier to track,
Okay.
Yeah.
And we could do that because, okay. And I update my motion to the end of June.
And then, yes, I second.
All right. So we have, we're basically taking ordinance 025 and updating that. We will add the language to, we will replace 025 with a new ordinance that has those provisions about meetings. It obviously keeps the town administrator able to run the town the way he is, which is with town hall closed and all of those COVID-19 considerations. We will put in there the thing about giving boards and commissions the options to meet if they want, but we're not forcing them to meet if it's against their will. And we'll make this all expire, what was it, end of June?
End of June.
So Mr. Paglini, we have that motion, we have that second. Before we vote, is this something we could do in a new ordinance with a new number and a new date?
Yes, sir.
All right, is that clear to all the committee members?
Yes, I just have one question about boards and commissions.
Yes.
So I understand, it's tough to, I guess, when there's, obviously board members and board chairs. But I think council made it clear, well, at least by a 5-4 vote at the last meeting, that boards and commissions need to be meeting. And I think if there's a member or two that does not feel comfortable with that or doesn't want to do that, that's okay. I mean, it can still constitute a quorum, even if it's the chair. I don't know. I mean, there's important time deadlines and things that these boards and commissions do. And I think just saying, oh, you don't have to meet is not the direction that council went at the last emergency meeting.
Jake, the feedback I got is there are some members on there, and it's not necessarily their concerns about COVID-19. It's their concerns about passing things that affect people's lives if there is no guaranteed way for public participation. That when they accepted our appointment to be on those boards and commissions, they did not agree to do things at which the public could not come and be heard. And so far, I think Eric's on here, so far, I don't think we have the technology for the public to be able to participate unless something has changed since the last time I was told anything about it. Let me ask Eric real quickly.
That's right, sir. I mean, we have been working, as I commented, I think yesterday about this, trying to provide that opportunity. One thing that I believe, not to necessarily put words in his mouth, but the chairman of the Board of Zoning Appeals was concerned about was that interaction, the being able to hear the tone of someone speaking. And I think they were more concerned about that not being able to be provided, which can only be provided in person.
Yeah, I mean, I just think you can make the same case about, council also voted to start doing our regular committee meetings like we're doing today, regular council meetings. I think that the same case could be made. Again, I mean, we can't have these boards and commissions go months and months and months with no end in sight to when they're going to meet. And I don't know. I feel like sneaking, that's not the right word. I'm going to take that word back. I feel like putting this language wrapping it into this emergency ordinance kind of feels like we're trying to undo the vote that was already done a week ago.
Well, Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Whitley? Yep.
the vote of council was related to, because after the motion for reconsideration, it was related only to BOZA, DRB, and planning. So I think so long as those committees meet, and that's fine. I think I wouldn't want any of the other committees to meet, because I think that's a huge expenditure to buy iPads for all of them to have to use. And I guess Mr. DeMora had stated that those would be retrieved and eventually doled out to town employees over time. And so, but it would be an initial upfront cost that I don't think is necessary for some of these other volunteer boards and commissions that don't have urgent business before them. But I do agree with you, Jake, even though I was on the other side of that vote, the vote of council was to have DRB, planning commission, and BOZA meet.
Yeah, the concern is if we're not sure that it meets the public legal scrutiny of public input, if we demand that they meet, what we're saying is that you must meet regardless of whether we know or as board members that public is given ample participation. So if there can at least be some qualifier in there, because right now, according to what I'm hearing, what we're saying is you must meet. But how about you will meet if it's a valid legal meeting? I mean, we don't know that for sure. Everybody in the town of Mount Pleasant that could be affected by a BOZA decision about a cell tower may not have the technology to email or to watch via video or anything like that. And the last thing we want is for our volunteer appointed board members to end up being in a lawsuit for something we forced them to do without considering the whole legal environment.
can we get legal's opinion on that argument?
Yeah, Mr. Rambo, I agree with what was said. I think we have a couple concerns, and one is at the end of all of this, are these types of meetings going to meet that type of scrutiny? We've known that since the beginning. The Supreme Court and the legislature and the governor have certainly afforded this flexibility, and it's necessary. It's necessary to continue government business, but I mean, you ask a lawyer if there's risk, of course, there's always going to be risk. And if council wishes to mitigate that by restricting the citizen-appointed boards and commissions only to mandatory items, that's fine too. I think including it in an emergency ordinance provides council the flexibility to have it if necessary. And specifically not requiring it is the wise move, but having the flexibility to do it if and when necessary.
Mr. Mayor, this is Ms.
Yes.
Whitley again. I mean, the arguments that you made about public comment and ability to participate apply to this meeting that we're having right now and apply to our monthly council meetings that we're having virtually. So I guess I just don't see if we're going to make that distinction, you know, should we be meeting virtually? So I just don't see it as being a major issue. If people have the proper notice, and we are operating under a state of emergency, and the council did vote 5-4 to have those three major public boards meet.
Is that to me or to legal?
That was just a statement.
Okay.
I do want to clarify though, GM's motion was to basically do a new ordinance that expires at the end of June. I don't think she said anything about including boards and commissions language in there.
And I don't
so
think we
I
need
don't
to
believe that's part of the motion. Correct me if I'm wrong, GM. Ms. Whitley, excuse me.
I mean, I did want to do kind of what the mayor said and add that provision in there, or add a provision about the meetings of those, but I don't think it should be something of all boards and commissions should meet, or should meet if they want to virtually. I don't think that should be in there. It should just relate to those three boards that were voted on by council. And again, this is just a recommendation, so this could get changed at the full council level.
Right.
And we just want it in the draft.
Mr. Pagliarini, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Were you saying that the better legal path would be allow them to meet, but not order them to meet, or did I just hear what I wanted to?
I think we said the same thing, Mayor. So whether you wanted to hear it, that's what I said. But I understand what Ms. Whitley's asking tracks what council did last week, and that is Board of Zoning Appeals, DRB, and Planning Commission have the ability, have the authority to meet if necessary using electronic means, and that just provides the flexibility.
Okay, and since we have a motion and a second and we're in discussion, can we agree to have legal draw that up? I think he's heard everything we all say. Draw that up in a draft, and we'll present that as a recommendation of this committee to full council, and he'll put the right legal wording in it. Jake, does that satisfy you? Is that all right?
That's okay.
Okay.
I understand the argument.
Ms. Hyatt, are you on board?
Yes. I was going to say that my original vote at the last meeting regarding this was with the hope that things would be worked out to meet in person, because I know that's really critical for everybody to have their input. So is there any way we can work towards that? A larger area? I mean, restaurants are opening now. Is there a way to organize it with social distancing? Even if we leave people outside of the room, let them come in one at a time to speak with a speaker outside for I don't know if there's a way for us to arrange it that's even easier than buying iPads. If we could let a few in at a time and have a microphone out where people can hear the public comments and they can take turns and then we're social distanced. I just
Oh.
really hope that any meetings moving forward, we could do, in person when they're that important to get public input.
Right.
I know with us, as far as council, we've sort of worked on things that we really have to work on,
Right.
that probably require a little less input from the public in general. But some of these BOZA things, you can fill a room with if it means that much to people, and it's going to impact them that much. So I just think it's critical for them to try to meet. And if there's any way we can, facilitate that, it would be good.
And let me jump in there. Having Eric, having included me in your daily staff teleconference, a consideration might be what is the stance of staff so far as when you and the staff and the plan, and given our risk management and our emergency management and all the professional things that they consider, what's sort of the threshold of telling staff members that you will come into town hall, you will be at a meeting with the public, because staff has to have a level of comfort with the in-person meeting as well. And I'm not sure what the timetable is or what the data threshold is for getting to the point where we feel comfortable, because that would basically involve reopening at least part of town hall, would it not, Mr. Demore?
Well, certainly, sir, but I think you'd expect me to say this. If it's the will of council to have a meeting here on site, we will make that happen. If that is the case, then we would take all precautions necessary with regard to spacing and spreading people out. We'd even try to encourage the public who isn't there to speak on a matter, but maybe just wishes to view it, perhaps early on when we have meetings, to recommend that they view it electronically and not actually be present, just so we can manage the population that's here. But we could do it if that's council's desire.
Let me ask you a question. As a public body, given that other institutions, or I guess I should say businesses that are open, are limited to a percentage of their maximum capacity, do we think that would apply to a public meeting in council chambers? Legal, do we have any? I'm not aware of any public body that has held a public meeting, so I don't know what restrictions apply.
Well, I'm not sure if this is the answer to the question, but the governor's recent orders maintain the group limitations, groups of 3, social distancing and the like. Is that what you're asking, Mayor?
Yeah, all of that, plus the one on stores that they can only have 5 people per 1,000 feet, or 20% of their maximum occupancy, whichever is greater.
Right. So, and those have not been lifted. So we still have that in front of us. But as Ms. Hyatt suggests, as we're working towards that, and as has been previously mentioned, those restrictions are changing regularly. And perhaps by the end of the month, or even in a week or two, we'll see that change. But at the very least, staff can begin the process to be able to identify the issues and concerns.
Okay. So how about this? Before we vote on this, let's have legal take all these considerations to mind and draft us something that says, obviously we can't break state law. We can't break the executive order of the governor to do something like that, but we would give ourselves and our boards and commissions the option to do that. Does that sound reasonable? Does that sound doable? Mr. Pagliarini?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. Committee members?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Are we prepared to vote?
Let's go for it.
All right. All in favor of the motion, passing the motion as stated by Mrs. Whitley, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So that will go as a recommendation, unanimous recommendation of this committee to full council about enacting a new emergency ordinance of council. So that concludes item 7A. Item 7B, and these two are often confused, is discussion of a declaration of civil emergency by the mayor and possible changes. I think back to when we did this on May 16th, and we wondered if we should make it for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and here we are, the first week of May. Who would have known?
Yeah,
I
for
appreciate
real.
the fact, council has and has always had veto power over proclamations or any aspect of those. That has not been done by council, and but it's a good tool to have. And Mr. Pagliarini and I discussed this by phone last week. There are pros and cons either way. Whatever the will of council is, I would like to know the will of council. Personally, I am more than ready to not be under an emergency proclamation. That's me personally. But if there is anything that could adversely affect by revoking that, either funding or any flexibility we have to get anything done, I don't want to do it just because I feel like not having it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I want the advice of our lawyers. I want the advice of counsel, and let's make this decision. Nobody ever thought that this thing would last this long when we were coming into this. So,
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
This is Ms. Whitley.
Yes,
I would
Ms. Whitley.
think that we would keep our state of emergency in place so long as the state of South Carolina has an emergency in place.
That is something to consider. Yes, that's the legal question I have for Mr. Pagliarini. If we lift the declaration of civil emergency, does that in effect mean there is no form of state of emergency in the town of Mount Pleasant? Is that the only form we have?
No, Mayor, the South Carolina state of emergency, which is through May 15th at this point, certainly takes precedence. Our state of emergency primarily is a trigger to utilize the provisions of Chapter 41 of our code. So without it in the town, then there's an inability, lack of ability or authority to utilize those emergency provisions in 41. But I don't think there's any other, as long as there's a state of emergency in the South Carolina, state of South Carolina, then of course we have the ability to pass these emergency ordinances and the like.
What about funding?
Mr. Rambo, we have looked into this question. I don't believe there's any funding requirements or elements that would be triggered by a local state of emergency. And we continue to review that and continue to be aware of that. But at this point, we have located nothing to indicate that that is a precursor for any funding.
Okay.
The only thing I can think of, and GM, I agree, there's probably some wisdom, if you look at the pros and cons of keeping the local civil emergency so we have that flexibility. I mean, we can revoke it tomorrow, we can enhance it tomorrow, we can relax it tomorrow or whatever. Without it, everything we do, we have to have a full council meeting with a quorum, with an agenda, and all of that. And as much as I would like to, and I guess legal can say, I guess the mayor can just revoke it because the mayor wants to revoke it, but I don't want to do that. And then next week have y'all say, why the heck did you do that? Now we have to have a full meeting every time just to change something. But I personally am more than happy to not have the state of civil emergency. So that's why we need council to weigh in on this.
Mayor, this is David again.
Hang on.
I just two considerations. One is that as we sit here right now, our state of emergency ends on the 7th and the state the 15th. So we've tried to maintain some similarity, but every time the governor comes out and changes it, it sort of brings a reaction. And then I just also want to bring to the committee's attention, and I know that the governor put out a good bit of information over the weekend. The new executive orders do change some things and are, I don't want to say at odds, because as Mayor and I have discussed, the priority, for example, short-term rentals. The governor weighed in on that issue and removed, and of course that takes precedence over what we as a town, whether it be through a mayoral proclamation or town emergency, that takes precedence. So I don't see any necessary need to change that but for purposes of confusion and providing consistent information to the public, those are some things we might want to consider as we move forward.
Thank you. And if it's the will of council to keep the civil emergency in there, legal will make sure that ours is updated every time the executive orders change. For instance, ours currently says short-term rentals are prohibited, but the governor removed that, so we would have to update that. I just don't want to keep one in place if it's not the will of council to have one in place. Having spoken individually, I know some want it there for the flexibility and some think it's time to remove it. I just want to know what the will of council as a majority would be, and this committee would be the place to start. I've let you know my personal feelings. Ms. Rambo, you raising your hand? I can see you on my
Oh,
screen.
yeah, I forget you may or may not be able to see me when I raise
Right.
my hand. I have a couple of questions, Mr. Mayor, for you as well as for legal. In watching the governor's press conference on Friday, obviously he is now allowing outdoor dining, tables up to 8 people. They don't have to be from the same family. I think it's a very different message than we're sending right now with, like, for instance, the restrictions that we have in our parks. Like, you have to maintain 6 feet of separation. There has to be social distancing will be enforced. People have to keep moving. You can't have a picnic. I don't know. I guess I have a lot of questions about that. I mean, it seems like we need to lift a good bit of restrictions on some of our parks. I mean, I hate to speak from a parent perspective, but I mean, 8 people can sit at a table together and eat a meal out in public, but my son can't play basketball with one of his friends at the park. Like, just doesn't. I don't know. Those two things seem to be at odds.
I had not seen the 8 people at a table thing. I didn't know about that.
Mayor, that comes from, and Mr. Rambo, we have spent an inordinate amount of time this weekend trying to put together what came out on Friday. And you are correct. There appear to be significant inconsistencies. And I think what you're specifically referencing is the outdoor dining references the South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association guidelines. And those guidelines limit table groups up to 8 individuals. I'm not sure that, and you may have additional information that I haven't seen where that specifically says it can be people from different families. But when I go back to the governor's order 2020-31, there is a modification of the home or work order, but it also specifically provides that individuals are still subject to the provisions of prior orders, which means groups of 3. So,
okay, can I expand on that thought as well, David? So, when the governor was taking questions after at the conclusion of his statement at the press conference, somebody specifically asked him about the groups of 3 or more people, and he specifically said that was misunderstood. That the groups of 3 or more people are not allowed if they're causing problems, is basically what he said. But that in general, no, you can have 3 or more people in a group. I don't know if you watched the press conference or.
Yeah, and it does say that because in the order it says if any such congregation or gathering is deemed to pose or could pose a threat to public health. I have no idea how that is enforceable or not enforceable. So you're correct. I think from an enforcement standpoint, it does seem like 8 at a table, given the guidelines, and then you can read the executive order. Then the question is, does it pose or could it pose a threat to public health? So that's sort of the inconsistencies that we're dealing with from an enforcement standpoint.
I'll say this on a lot of these, the biggest flexibility that the Chapter 41 civil declaration of civil emergency and using those proclamations gave was when the governor said, for instance, like everybody who checks in, regardless of what type of lodging from those hotspot areas, whether it was New Orleans or New York or New Jersey or whatever, We did not have the manpower and the resources to enforce that on the between 400 and 500 short-term rentals that we're told function in our town. So I was able to use the proclamation to say, since we can't comply with the executive order, that's why we did that, to limit exposure and to not spread our enforcement out. So it was only a tool to use what the governor in that case was saying, here's something that you must do. You must do this. So on this end of it, on the coming out end, it's probably harder, especially what I feel, it's harder to have this than it was to have it going in.
Yeah, it
But
really is.
if council wants to leave it there for the sake that if on the spur of the moment there is something that council wants done and puts in a proclamation, we can do without holding a whole meeting and publishing an agenda and having legal and staff and IT and all that there. I get it. I totally get it. But it's much harder having the civil emergency on this end than it was on the going in end, because that way we could do what was in the best interest of our town. This, we're getting a mixed message coming out, and it's very hard to know what to do.
Mr. Mayor,
Whit-
Ms. Whitley,
Yes.
is there a way, if we do update the declaration of civil emergency, to make it inclusive of the governor's mandates in such a way that we're not having to use legal time, use their energy to redraft a proclamation every day or every 5 days, every time there's a press conference? Is there a way to, remove some of the provisions in that declaration, or just have some language in there that says, of course, any prior line in this that is not in compliance with the governor's orders is now no longer in effect, rather than have to spin the wheels of our attorneys redrafting every 3 to 5 days?
And Ms. Whitley, again, this is David. We are doing that. The Mayor and I have talked about that. We've taken careful or certain precautions to make sure, understanding that changes could be made on a daily basis, so that we're essentially anything that comes out subsequent that might run contrary, the governor's order takes precedence. And as I mentioned earlier, a specific example of that is the short-term rentals. I think by operation of law, the governor's order on this weekend from Friday makes our proclamation isn't necessarily out of compliance because the governor's order takes precedence. I think the issue of concern is the message to the public. And that would be the basis for making those changes on a regularly.
For instance, since that came out over the weekend and it's Monday, I don't want the proclamation with my signature on it outlawing or prohibiting, not outlawing, prohibiting short-term rental occupancy for a specific period going another day with my signature on it. I want that updated and changed, or I guess we can't get the will of all of council today, but I guess I'm answering my own question is to David. We would go ahead and update the proclamation as long as it is still in effect, so that it's not, contradicting the governor's right now, especially on short-term rentals. But I just want to know whether council wants a civil emergency, and the only thing I can see we would do is update it as the governor changes things. Is maybe if we do keep it, is to keep it as long as there is a state declared emergency, which is what, David, the 15th, and
Yes.
only use it if there's something that council were to call and say, we need to do something and let's put this in there. Otherwise, it would just roll with the executive orders from the state. That's the only intent I would have for it, honestly. What's y'all's feedback on that?
Mine would be if we're saying it's just gonna follow what the governor's saying, but there's no funding, like I know the governor even said extending his state of emergency is directly tied to receiving federal funds, which
Right.
is why he's going to continue extending it until who knows.
Okay.
But if if there's no direct tie to funds and all we're going to do is follow exactly what the governor's saying coming out of this, I just don't see a reason to have it. It just seems like
Yeah.
extra work and hassle for no gain.
Right.
Um,
Ms. Whitley? Yes.
if we were to remove this, then anytime there was a need for something, a special council meeting would have to be called, 24 hours notice given to the public. Is that correct?
That's what we do, but state law, correct me if I'm wrong, does not require, if it's addressing emergency issues, that we can do it without 24 hours. Is that correct, Mr. Pagliarini?
That's correct. We have been doing it just as a, because we believe if we can do it, it's the right thing to do it.
Right.
Okay. Well, then I think I agree with Mr. Rambo. It doesn't seem like there's a need to extend our declaration of civil emergency.
Right. And that's what I was saying at the beginning, unless y'all wanted it there. And Mr. Pagliarini, if we had to, let's say, Lord forbid, there's a second spike and the state starts, peeling things back and we start going towards more restrictions rather than less, we can always do another one if council wants, right?
That's correct. I think there's still flexibility involved in that by council action and or by mayoral declaration, it can be re-implemented.
Okay.
And this is set to expire May 17th. Is that correct?
May 7th.
May 7th.
Okay.
So
we need a
Just let it
recommendation?
expire, I guess.
Right. Do we need to make a recommendation to council?
I would like a recommendation from this committee and it can be shared with council either in the form of a meeting or me talking individually to other council members. I know a couple have said, we're not putting on more restrictions now, we're easing things now. But if we needed to do something, having it has that flexibility, but I think that flexibility is there if the need is so great just to do another declaration. Council said, yeah, we need to do another declaration. I personally, and this is me personally, this is talking about my personal feelings, not all the legal stuff. I would rather it not still be in effect. It's a lot. It's an extra burden, as it were. It all falls on the mayor. I think it served its purpose going in, and I personally don't see the need to continue it unless it were the will of council to do it for some functional reason.
Mayor, I'd like to move, we recommend full council to allow the declaration of civil emergency to expire.
Okay, on its date of May 7th?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, we have discussion. Ms. Hyatt, we hadn't heard from you in a minute. Do you have any thoughts?
I was just gonna say, letting it expire, I guess, sends a better message than, doing it today or something.
Okay,
We don't want people to think that we have no more concerns.
good point.
So
That is a good point.
with it,
Yeah,
letting
that's
it
a very good
have a
point.
natural process, and while things are opening, I just think, public perception is important as well. We don't want to just cut it off and make it act like everything's business as usual. So I'm fine with it.
While we're in discussion though, since technically our local proclamation does prohibit short-term rentals, I would like, for my own liability purpose, I would like to have a legal update it and to remove that so that we're in compliance with the governors. And then as the new one is, it will then expire on May 7th. Does that sound like what's in the spirit of this motion? Jake?
Yes,
can't
I
speak to you.
agree.
I see y'all
I think that
shaking
would be good. Ms. Hyatt makes a great point. I think letting it expire, I didn't think about that. That was
Ms. Whitley, does that make sense? We
Yes.
will update it so it's compliant, and then the recommendation will be that it will expire.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion before we vote? Y'all,
Oh, sorry. No, we can vote on that.
all in favor of the motion that it be updated and then allowed to expire on the 7th as is currently scheduled, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good, motion passes.
Mr. Mayor, can I have more discussion on the agenda topic before we move on to the next?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So it was my understanding that, really, Mr. Mayor, it was your emergency proclamation that had two effects above the governor. One was the short-term rental thing, and the other dealt with the parks closing.
Yes.
And so since we've voted on this phase 2 and new orders have come out, when is an appropriate time? And I think some of the restrictions that we've put on parks, obviously things are changing rapidly. And some
Right.
of these restrictions that we've put on parks really don't make as much sense even today as they did
A
at
week
this
ago.
time last week.
Right.
If council is meeting tomorrow anyway, I know the Economic Development Committee, I think, was the one that called a meeting for tomorrow. I don't know, can we look, since we're meeting again already, can we look at these park restrictions? For instance, I mean, if you can have outdoor dining, you should be able to have a picnic. I mean,
I get, yeah. I can tell you this, in the context of this, to stick to our agenda, we'll make sure that the proclamation that will expire on the 7th updates to say what council voted on last Monday. Because council hasn't voted on anything else. So we'll make sure the proclamation in that, if legal says that's necessary, it was an act of council. But you're talking about the next council meeting, which will be tomorrow afternoon. I don't see why we couldn't put that on the agenda as well.
Yeah, to just revisit the park restrictions.
Yeah. And let's get clarity. I think there's a discrepancy between what the Restaurant Association was recommending and what the governor's order says. And we're bound to go by the governor's order on those things. So.
Yeah, I just think in general, I mean, we can't expect our police to ride around and fuss at every single person they see within 6 feet of each other. I mean, at some point it just becomes a personal responsibility. Well, you know what I mean.
Our police encourage, they don't fuss.
Even the whole keep it moving, you can't sit at a park. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we've just gone beyond all of that, and it just.
May I add?
You may. You have the floor. Yes.
Okay. I was just going to say the meeting for tomorrow is supposed to help with social distancing, basically talking about letting restaurants expand to outdoors to a bigger area. So we're still following in line with, keeping the public safe. So I don't know if that'll conflict with lifting everything on the with the parks or not, but just the idea of tomorrow is supposed to allow continued social distancing and allowing businesses to open as much as they can. So
we will
if it could just be on there for discussion and possible action, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, discussion. Yeah.
Let's ask Mr. Pagliarini, when a committee calls for a special meeting to address something that came out of that committee, are the rest of us allowed to put other items on that special meeting agenda?
Yes, Mayor. I think if that special meeting is called, it can't necessarily be limited for one purpose. So one of the thoughts we've already discussed, the possibility of having the previously voted item to update the emergency ordinance 2025. We can get that done. And if you want to have a discussion item on the parks, that's certainly right for discussion as well.
Okay, because we've got 3 layers of things here. We have our regular meetings where things go on the agenda. Now we're in emergency meetings, plus we're in a called meeting from a committee. So I just wanted to make sure that we weren't violating any ordinances here, that when all this is over, people look back and say, hey, y'all should not have done this. That was not right.
And Mayor, I'd like to confirm with the town administrator that before I make a decision, confirm with the town administrator that that's acceptable from a staff standpoint.
Yes.
And we are aiming for 3 or 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. One reason is on Friday, you'll probably saw the launch from the Regional Development Alliance of the Reignite, which is the thing that the medical university and the business leaders are working on, saying, we want to open sooner rather than later, but we want the public and staff members of businesses to feel safe. Right now, their local polling shows that 70% of the public does not feel safe going in businesses and all this kind of stuff. The point is to address that. So they want to come. give us information. So all these things we consider, their whole thing is, let's take the emotion and the politics out of it. Let's listen to the recommendations of the experts. And, Jake, like you're talking about parks, having picnics is a totally different thing than having every kid play on every piece of playground equipment and all that kind of stuff. And so there's layers of safety along with opening and becoming, more open, but still being safe, because let's don't kid ourselves. The virus is still out there, but we can be smart and still beat the virus, right? So it sounds like tomorrow we will have a meeting that does the emergency ordinance, that discusses the declaration of civil emergency, that discusses allowing, parking lots and stuff for restaurants, what's coming out of economic development. So it will probably be those three things plus parks, 4 things on the agenda tomorrow. And the last thing on our agenda is how to proceed on evaluating applications for hiring of a general counsel, which we voted to do. Ms. Whitley, you had made an offer back a month or so ago to just kind of go through as a law school graduate and a lawyer yourself, to sort of categorize, not eliminate, not curate, but just categorize the applications. I think that's a good idea. I'm not sure what the will of the rest of council is to do this, but I have an idea I want to share. Everybody gets all the applications. Everybody gets the applications as you, Ms. Whitley, see as one trained in law of, different levels of maybe education and experience, education, just experience, and then everything else. Maybe there's 4 different things that sort of helps us figure it out. And then an idea I had is, let's give all the applications to all of council and tell everybody to come back with their top 10. And let's deconflict that list, and out of how many applications we get, let's see if it's very clear who everybody agrees on are the top applicants and take it from there. I don't know how else to call it down. Yes, Ms. Whitley.
I actually think if we're going to do that, if everyone gets all of them and sort of picks their top 10, then I don't see any reason for me to go through and do a tiering, because everyone's going to have to look at every applicant anyway. And, people will be looking for different things. So I think sending them to, I'm not sure the magnitude of the applications, but if people find that it's overwhelming, or if any individual member of council wants to ask me questions, I'm happy to be available to answer questions. But I think having everyone receive all the applications and come up with their top 10, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. One of the things we did look at, and we got the clerk to inform us on, is when we were choosing, judges, municipal judges, the committee, Police, Judicial, and Legal Committee, actually screened them. When we brought them in and asked questions, that was actually the committee. And then the committee made the recommendations to full council, and full council voted on that. I get the feeling just from talking to individual council members, they don't want the committee to just do that. So I'm thinking the best thing is tell everybody, rate your top 10. Let's see what we get. I think generally in things like this, you get a real clear impression. There's usually not a whole lot of outliers on something like that. Are we willing to recommend that to all of council, that just everybody take a look and say, these are my top 10? Ms. Hyatt,
Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Hyatt, yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say, maybe there's a way to rank them rather than just top 10, like be specific, number them 1 to 10.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we could see
Sure.
how many people match up and think, oh, this is my number 1, this is my number 2. Maybe that would help
We have like
narrow.
a weighted average. Yes. Okay. Your top 10 in order of ranking.
Right.
Mr. Rambo.
I don't know if I should say this, but I'm gonna just be Tom O'Rourke and say it anyway. I've gone through them, and I don't know that there are 10. And so I'm very concerned. This is an extremely, obviously important position long term for the organization. And at first, I certainly didn't even want to consider the cost of hiring a search firm or a headhunter. But at this point, that is my recommendation. I think we need to seriously consider hiring a search firm to get a really great qualified candidate that would be a good fit. And I don't know how other people feel about that, but I'm not ready to move forward with the pool that is there.
Could we ask Mr. Demora to get back to this committee with some ideas of what that looks like? I have no idea what kind of cost that looks like, what type of headhunters there are for general counsel positions. Could we just get some information and then?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Demora, does that sound okay to you?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Whitley.
Yes, Ms. Whitley?
I think in the meantime, though, I mean, unless I missed it, and I apologize if I missed it, I have not seen any access to the applicants. So I think we should, in the meantime, allow the full council to get a chance to update themselves on the applicant pool and make, because I think that will inform any sort of decision later regarding hiring a search firm to do it. And there's search firms.
And Ms.
that are
Whitley, it was
solely
sent out a few
people.
weeks ago. It was in the middle of at the beginning of the crisis. So trust
I
me,
apologize.
no worries. But it is there if you look. They were all put into like a Google Drive folder.
They were
that
okay.
was
All right,
sent to
I'll
all
search
of us.
for it.
Yeah.
It's there.
Okay,
And that needs to be updated.
Now,
Ms. Hyatt, yes.
what's the deadline to apply?
There's no deadline. I don't
Was there a
It's just until
deadline?
Did they post a deadline like that the application process?
No, ma'am.
Does it have a posted deadline to apply?
There was no deadline.
Okay.
It was submitted, the position was posted on April 2nd. So we're into our 5th week now, and it's rolling. So if someone sees it now, they're welcome to apply. It has not been closed.
Okay. And
Well, it's
what's
been
the
a month.
outreach on that? I mean, it's on the town website, and then where else do we post?
Yeah. We've posted it at the South Carolina Bar Association.
Mhm.
We posted it with the American Bar Association, as well as the Municipal Association of South Carolina. By the way, attorneys are usually members of that who have municipal experience. The National City Managers Group, same type situation, as well as other job search, more commonly used job search locations like LinkedIn and Indeed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so I think what I hear is we want all council members to take a look, get a ranked, send back their ranked list. That's a good first step we can do for now. Mr. Demora will get back to us with some possibilities for Mr. Rambo's idea of what would it look like if we hired someone to help us recruit and do this. Does that sound reasonable? I don't think
That's
that
great.
requires action because all we're asking for is information to come back.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Everybody clear?
Yep. Can I ask
Right.
one general police question before we adjourn?
I think so, yeah.
I know at our last whatever meeting, the police chief told us that there had only been one citation for violation of the governor's order. Have there been anything further?
Mr. Rambo, there have not been.
Okay.
We've done a good job to not over-police.
Yeah.
We have really been working with our citizens, and it's just been a great partnership, and we're doing very well with it.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Chief.
That was all
Chief,
I had.
I want to say again publicly too, and I hear it from our citizens that our police really work with our citizens and our businesses, and that is a hallmark of Mount Pleasant Police, and that's a credit to you and your people, and we really appreciate that. There's no Gestapo tactics. I've seen on social media, places referring to Nazi tactics and then that. Not in the town of Mount Pleasant. Not here.
No, sir, not on my watch.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, glad to
Appreciate
do it. Yes, sir.
Anything else for the good of this committee? If not, item 8 is that we adjourn. Hearing nothing else, we will adjourn this committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.